Beyond Nagga are the forests of Mossovy, a cold, dark land of Shapechangers and demon hunters. Beyond Mossovy, no man of Westeros can truly say. Certain septums have claimed that the world ends east of Mossovy, giving way to a realm of mists, then a realm of darkness, and finally a realm of storm and chaos where sea and sky become as one. Sailors and singers and other dreamers prefer to believe that the shivering sea goes on, unending, past the easternmost coast of Essos, past islands and continents unknown, uncharted, and undreamed of, where strange peoples worship strange gods beneath stranger stars. Wiser men suggest that somewhere beyond the waters we know, east becomes west, and the shivering sea must surely join the sunset sea, if indeed the world is round. It may be so, or not, until some new sea snake arises to sail beyond the sunrise. No man can know for certain. And that's literally everything we are told about Mossovy. Besides that, and one line in Fire and Blood from the would-be good Queen Alysanne about how even if her father were to fling her over and marry her off to the King of Mossovy or the Lord of the Grey Waste, that she would still find her way back to Jaehaerys. That's literally it that we're given about Mossovy. So you may be wondering, well, Tim, if that's literally all that's talked about in Mossovy, how are we going to do a stream on that? And the answer to that is just those few lines, we can actually glean a lot. And that is just a testament to George R.R. Martin's world building. And if you've watched me on any of my other streams, or if you've seen me where I on any of the guest streams I've done with David Lightbringer, Lucifer means Lightbringer, maybe going back to the original name, then you know that I'm into foils and parallels. Like that's my jam. And with Mossovy, just the few characteristics were given, the grim gray forests, the Shapechangers, the demon hunters, it reminds us a lot of the haunted forest of Westeros. Shapechangers being wargs and demon hunters. The others are sometimes described as demons, as well as shadows and things of that nature. There's also the Andals, the warrior sons were described as demon hunters when they were notable for killing many of the children of the forest. The children of the forest were, in their eyes, demons, just as a not really demons, well, maybe, but not really demons as far as we know them, but demons in the way of as an insult, demons in their eyes, the way they saw them. And it's these things that we're going to discuss. We're also going to discuss the real world implications of Mossovy, since a lot of when George's world building, he's definitely, along with his fantasy element and the Lovecraftian element that he throws into a lot of things, there's also the real world basis that he's playing. Mossovy, of course, sounds like Moscow, the Kingdom of Muscovy, Khyven Rus. I've definitely picked a hell of a time in the present to be talking about Russia, but despite we're not focusing on current day events, despite Putin and his cocksucking cronies, that does not diminish Russian history, Slavic history, any of that. And so it's a great focus on it. And it's something that I'd like to talk about in regards to Mossovy, where I think what I think George might be doing, we're drawing inspiration from, especially Mossovy's placement atop the Grey Waste. It seems a lot like a very much Russia-Siberia parallel. And so these are the things we're going to go into, as well as talking about what might lie beyond Mossovy. What, like, does the world truly end beyond the forest? Are these chaos realms and mist realms, realms of darkness, realms of storms? Are these a thing, or could these be real? I don't think they're real, but they definitely play into the mythology and some of the religions and things of that nature that we see in Westeros and in Essos. And that's going to bring us to possible discussion about the Sunset Sea. Hey, Damon. Joining me is Damon, who shares the den with me. So He'll be popping in and out again. Goodbye, boy. He'll be popping in and out. And so first this is what we're going to get into. First, we're going to play that intro, and then we'll get started. All right. Okay, so yes, welcome to the Den of the Grey Waste. I am your host, Grey Waste Tim, and if you're joining us, we are going to be talking about Far Mossovy and how I believe it parallels to the Haunted Forest. We'll also be looking at some Russian and Slavic history, which seems to be the basis for Mossovy and the Grim Grey Forest. This is a continuation of a stream that I did with David Lightbringer. Lucifer means Lightbringer. Links to all the videos that I've done with Dave are in the video description, as well as some inspiration videos that this stream is based on by Quinn's ideas, David Lightbringer, the Disputed Lands, and another more small-time YouTuber, bigger than me, but more small-time than them, Alabaster. He brought a lot of interesting ideas in his video regarding the Deep Ones. And it's got me thinking a lot more about this whole edge of the world stuff. And just like the famous Seasnake Corlys Velaryon, me and Dave, despite doing 2.5 hours, going beyond the bones and beyond the Five Forts, we never made it to Mossovy. Corlys Velaryon never actually made it to Mossovy. He made it to the Thousand Islands, and then he got a good look at those green-skinned fish people, and it's just like, all right, I gotta get the fuck out of here and turn that boat around. Aside from really the last time we hear of Mossovy is Sarnori ships making it during the height of the Kingdom of Sarnor. So that is, we do need a new sea snake to take us to the far reaches of Mossovy, or you need a Sherpa. So, but you might be thinking, okay, Tim, well, if this is you continuing where you and Dave left off, well, where's Dave? You might say, well, Tim, you tripped Dave in the Cannibal Sands to save your own ass. Or, Tim, Dave got snatched up by squishers at the Bleeding Sea. Or, Tim, you got drunk on Shade of the Evening and you left the baby gate open. Lies and slander. After finishing in Carcosa, me and Dave doubled back to Ashai. We were going to spend the night there and then make our way back up through the Five Forts, gain passage there, and then we were going to continue the forest. But no, Dave ran into some woman who claimed to be from Ulthos. Now, she had a bear on her shoulder, and I swear the thing had fangs. She called it a koala, but it looked more like this. Bring up the picture here. Yeah. So she claimed to be from Ulthos. I was more focused on this bear, but he said that she was the most beautiful woman that he had ever seen. And he went off with her. She said something about going to see some black stone up in the mountains. So he went off with her. And that's the last we saw of Dave. So I run a respectable Sherpa business. And Dave's an adult and he can do what he wants. But just in case, if you see this man, please return him to your nearest fort. And Dave, if you are out there watching, no refunds. Okay. So going on into Mossovy. first thing I want to talk about is Mossovy as relative to Russia, and I want to bring up the map. Okay, so Mossovy, we're looking at the very, very end of the map, and Mossovy is in the very northeast of Essos, right before the map cuts off. It sits atop the Grey Waste. To the west is Nagga. West of that is the plains of the Jogos Nye. North of it, the Shivering Sea and the Thousand Isles. And then to the south, the Grey Waste and the Cannibal Sands. And what makes this Mossovy's placement is interesting because of where it sits relative to what we're told are the borders of the former Great Empire of the Dawn. Bring up the quote. Do I not have the quote? Oh, here we go. In the beginning, the priestly scribes of Yin declare all the land between the bones and the freezing desert called the Grey Waste, from the Shivering Sea to the Jade Sea, including even the great and holy Isle of Lang, formed a single realm ruled by the god on earth, the only begotten son of the Lion of Night and Maiden Made of Light, who traveled about his domains in a palanquin carved from a single pearl, carried by 100 queens, his wives. For 10,000 years, the great empire of the Dawn flourished in peace and plenty under the god on earth, until at last he ascended to the stars to join his forebears. So everything between the bones and what we know as the Five Forts, up to the Shivering Sea, and all the lands in between, up to the Grey Waste. So this may or may not include Mossovy because of where Mossovy sits. What's interesting is about the Mossovy is the open land barrier. The Five Forts as a structure were said to be built by the Pearl Emperor in order to guard against the demons of the Lion of the Night. And they combine with the natural formations of the Mountains of the Morn that run from the Shadowlands, along with the Bleeding Sea. And so the forts combined with those two natural barriers seem to block off the entire eastern stretches that go past the Grey Waste, Kadath, Carcosa, and all the weird legendary cities out there, like the cities of the Winged Men and cities of the Bloodless Men and things like that. But Mossovy theoretically could be walked into, because once you get north of the Bleeding Sea and the land opens back up, you could walk through. It seems like you could travel through Nagga and continue on into Mossovy. So it's possible that Mossovy was also once part of the Great Empire of the Dawn proper. And if it wasn't, then the fact that it's not blocked off, that there weren't any additional forts made to sort of block off this land route, if it wasn't part of the Great Empire of the Dawn proper, then it definitely would have been within its sphere of influence. And if you see me, you know I watch a lot of Kings and Generals. When I think of the Great Empire of the Dawn, while you can relate the Great Empire of the Dawn to numerous empires throughout history, Rome, Persia, what have you, I think the Great Empire of the Dawn and its fracturing, the quick succession of emperors or dynasties before finally falling into ruin, along with these natural disasters that come from the long night. It sounds a lot like the decline of the Mongol Empire. For me, Valyria is the better Rome example than the Great Empire. Great Empire seems to be more like Mongol Empire and later Chinese dynasties, especially because the successor state to the Great Empire of the Dawn is going to be Yi Ti. So Mossovy as a vassal state to the Great Empire of the Dawn seems a lot like Russia and the early Muscovite kingdoms and how they were a vassal to the Mongol horde. And then when the Great Empire of the Dawn falls and the tribes of men scatter in different directions, we see more of a cohesiveness into this formation of new areas, new nation states. And that tends to be pretty typical when we think of like actual falls of empires. Now, the Great Empire of the Dawn, this is something that David Lightbringer has talked about, and I agree immensely, is that when you have an empire the size of the Great Empire of the Dawn, it's going to be a multiracial, multi-ethnic empire. But when it falls, what we tend to see in real life people groups is people groups tend to kind of converge, and when something of that happens, they tend to kind of fall back onto more familiar lines, whether those be racial, ethnic, religious, things of that nature. And that is why you see these, after the Great Empire falls, but these smaller nations begin to rise in its place, and they seem to be a bit more homogenous, like how Yi Ti seems to be more analogous to China and continues to war against the Jogos Nai and things like that. So Mossovy, its real world inspirations seem to be based off of Russia, with the Grey Waste serving as a Siberia parallel. And another reason why I think Mossovy is based off of Russia is because of how it borders the Grey Waste and how that then leads into the Cannibal Sands and then into these deserts. There's a place in Russia called the Chara Sands, which is a place, I have pictures of that I want to bring up. This is a place where you kind of see like it would be taiga forest, desert, and Arctic tundra all coming together. It's actually really, really interesting to see. So this is a photo of the Chara Sands, and you can see like trees and snow, but also in the distance, you see the desert sand dunes, and then leading back to more Arctic mountains. This is another one. You can see the frozen sand dunes. And I had one more Chara Sands. Again, just more of these frozen sand dunes. Just a place again where forest and desert and Arctic all just come together in one area. So that's the Chara Sands, and those are in Russia, out near Siberia. And then Mossovy also sits parallel with the Thousand Islands. And the Thousand Islands are interesting because just how Mossovy sort of parallels the Haunted Forest, the Thousand Islands seem to be a parallel to... There are actually two parallels that I can place with the Thousand Islands, and that would be both the Iron Islands and the Stepstones. With the Stepstones, the idea is because the Thousand Islands are said to be the sunken remnants of a drowned kingdom. Same with the Stepstones. Stepstones used to be what we know as the Stepstones were originally the Arm of Dorne. that was then shattered by the Hammer of the Waters, and the Stepstones are the remaining bits. Well, when we think of the idea of whether or not Westeros connects to Essos, the Northern Passage theory that the lands of always winter eventually lead into the Grey Waste. It's possible that maybe they once did, because George has said that they're not connected, but he's never said exactly what is separating Essos from Westeros. Is it an ocean as wide as Pacific, or could it just be like a channel, a bay, a river? I tend to think of Beringia, the Beringia, and we have another one that I want to bring up. Share this one. Come on. So this is Beringia. If you accept the theory that this is how the first peoples came to the North American continent, that they climbed that they went across an ice bridge that then eventually ice and land bridge that eventually melted and was then covered by these ocean waves. That is what I could envision truly happening with something like the Thousand Islands and whatever possible connection there could have been in the past between northeastern Essos and northern Westeros. Because another thing about northern Westeros is before the seasons got all out of whack, we're told, it's another quote that I have here. Really should have did a better job of organizing my quotes, unfortunately. Not that one. Beyond the guy. Where was the quote? All right, I don't have the quote, unfortunately, so you're just gonna have to. It's into the world of ice and fire, but the domains of the children of the forest and the giants before the arrival of the first men, they went all the way from what we know as the lands of always winter down into Dorne originally. So there was at one point a time where the lands of always winter were more habitable, we could say. And if there was a connection between northern Westeros and northeastern Essos, then it's also possible that people may have crossed over. And that leads to this first men of the East theory, which is something we're going to get into later. And that's going to be, we're going to be talking about the Ironborn, as well as House Dade and House Hightower. These are houses, people that tend to get lumped in with the First Men, yet are so characteristically different from the First Men. A lot of that has to do with the fact that the Hightowers and the actual Hightower and its placement on Battle Isle, it's an island. The Iron Islands, they're islands. Starfall is an island in the Torrentine, but we're told that the first men were not seafaring people. But if they're not seafaring people, then how are they inhabiting islands? And when we talk about like what's past Mossovy, when we eventually reach the Sunset Sea, we have these 3 islands of Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys. These were the 3 islands discovered by Alyssa Farman when she decided to sail west of Westeros out into the Sunset Sea to see what's out there. And when she gets to these islands, she finds islands inhabited with these big lizard creatures with an infectious bite that sounds a lot like Komodo dragons, but also wild pigs. And the thing about pigs is, pigs on islands is a thing that tends to happen. It's something we see a lot in the Age of Exploration, when sailors and explorers are coming across these remote islands that aren't inhabited. But when you're dealing with miles and miles and miles of open ocean and you don't know where your next stop is going to be, what a lot of explorers and sailors would do is they would stop at these islands. They would leave just a few breeding pairs of pigs and sail on. And then on their way back, they could stop these islands. And by the time they got back, these breeding pairs would have just exploded in population. And then from there, you can stock up, hunt pigs, fill your larders with bacon and ham, make repairs, pick up on whatever natural fruits and vegetation are growing on these islands, and then continue sailing on. So the pigs are a big interesting thing, because the pigs imply that someone had visited these islands before. And with the Hightowers, House Hightower, they're said not just to be first men, but to maybe actually be predate the first men, with the sailors and traders who inhabited the Whispering Sound. Now, the Maesters chalk this up to ships coming out of Valyria and Geese, but we're also told that the foundation of Battle Isle, this fused black stone with its labyrinthine mazes, predate the freehold of Valyria. So this is like this stuff doesn't line up. How can there be Valyrians out in the Whispering Sound in an age that predates the freehold? It means that there had to have been visitors even earlier from a different area. And it seems like it might have been explorers coming from the west, which then eventually, because the world is round, like the Maesters say it's round, George has said it is round. They're coming from west, which eventually becomes the east directions. But yeah, this is First Men of the East theory. And we're going to get into that later when we start breaking down these little nuggets that were given to Mossovy, which we might as well just move on, because we've already talked about Mossovy as Russia. Next, let's talk about like Mossovy as the haunted forest. Now, again, like we're talking parallels and foils. George does this a lot in the story. We have people, places, and things that correlate with other people, places, and things, either in a different region or in a different time. Like we see this with characters like how Euron Greyjoy is a parallel to Night's King, but also a parallel to Bloodstone Emperor. Many characters are parallel of Azor Ahai. We see this with the Five Forts and the Wall. The Wall being a wall made of ice built to keep out the others, and now serving to keep out the free folk, the wildlings. And the Five Forts being made of this fused black stone implies being built with dragons, dragonfire. So that makes them to the Wall of Westeros, which is an ice wall, makes the Five Forts a firewall. And if this video was sponsored, this is when I would start shilling for NordVPN. But these 5 forts are a structure built to keep out the demons of the long night, or demons of the Lion of Night, but now serve as a means of guarding the Golden Empire of Yi from raiders out of the Grey Waste. So again, like all 2 walls, both meant to keep out some monsters of the past, but now are serving to keep out what the respective places they're protecting would view as savages and barbarians, the free folk, the wildlings beyond the wall, and the raiders out of the Grey Waste, which just basically just sounds like Essos wildlings. And then George does this with characters. Another big inspiration that I gotta give my nods to would be Joe Magician. If you've seen his Brienne, Pretty Maris, and Sandor Clegane, Coggle Corpse Killer videos, where how those characters seem to parallel, how Brienne seems to be Maris if George had gone through with his original 5-year gap idea. Same thing with, like, there's the Children of the Forest and the Woodwalkers, the Forest of the Ifakeveron. So Mossovy, this grim gray forest, this cold, dark land inhabited by Shapechangers and demon hunters, and then bordering on the complete unknown, realms of mist and darkness and chaos. It sounds a lot like the Haunted Forest. And then the Haunted Forest eventually leading up into the Frostfangs, which then eventually lead to the absolute unknown, which are the lands of always winter, things that are completely, as far as we know, entirely uncharted by humans. And the Haunted Forest, in their own right, we have a couple quotes about them in the Thoughts of John. Where he actually, again, I really should have done a better job of organizing these. Okay, so these are some quotes about the Haunted Forest. They had ridden past the end of the world. Somehow that changed everything. Every shadow seemed darker, every sound more ominous. That's Thoughts of John from John 6 in A Game of Thrones. He compares the Haunted Forest to the end of the world, the same way that Mossovy is compared to the end of the world. Other ones about the Haunted Forest. Few axes had ever swung in that black wood, where even the moonlight could not penetrate the ancient tangle of root and thorn and grasping limb. Out there, the trees grew huge, and the rangers said they seemed to brood and knew not men. It was small wonder the Night's Watch named it the Haunted Forest. And then lastly, this is the Haunted Forest. Maybe there are ghosts here, the spirits of the first men. This was their place once. 1,000 leaves fluttered, and for a moment the forest seemed a deep green sea, storm-tossed and heaving, eternal and unknowable. And this seems to... Yeah, exactly, Terra Incognita. The Grumpkins and the Snarks. So Mossovy, with as these grim gray forests, sounds a lot like this. Which then, so the imagery that we're presented, just like we're presented with the... Let's get gray wasted. Yes, yes. Thank you, Comrade Conrad. Somebody you picked up on the catchphrase. Yes, yes. Get gray wasted. If this channel ever takes off, I swear I'm going to put that on a T-shirt. I already have design ideas for that, and I'm in talks with my good buddy Nick Eck, the artist who designed my house sigil and who designed that King in Yellow little avatar that I use in my intro. I do have an idea for a Get Gray Wasted shirt. So yeah, I'm keeping that one in my back pocket in case things open up. But yes, thank you. And thank you for everyone that showed up. Thank you everyone in the chat. It's great to see everybody. Glad that people are enjoying this, because we're talking when we're talking Mossovy, like, we're talking this is already a niche thing that I'm doing. And we're talking niches of niches ideas when we're going this far out into the Far East. But this is the stuff that excites me. In fact, like, just to talk, like, just a little pivot. If you've been watching other bigger streams, which I'm sure you have, especially if you're here, more than likely means that you're a fan of Lucifer Means Lightbringer, because that's the one where Dave's the one whose show I've been on the most, and he's the one who's really given me a groundwork to begin starting my own streams. But he recently did his Reasons That George is Stuck stream. And this is coming off of George's recent blog post, where it seems like the Winds of Winter is becoming less and less a priority with these new shows. Now, I'm still holding out hope that we will eventually get Winds of Winter. I'm hoping that George will take ideas that, like David suggested, which is the idea of not doing it as one big book, release it piecemeal, or release like a smaller companion book, especially since it really does seem like the thing that's holding Winds back is the sheer amount of Dany chapters that would be needed to get the Marine story to get up to terms with the rest of the story, because Dany is so far behind. This is even it's confirmed by Elio and fucking Linda. But they did I'll have to update the video info, but there was I'll have to link to the video where it's just a quick 3-minute segment where they were talking about George's problems with the Winds of Winter. And it really does seem like a big thing that's hampering Winds is Dany's role in the story. Basically, she's too far away. She's been in Marine too long, and trying to get her to catch up and getting all of that, plus all the other POV chapters and all the other important things, and then trying to fit that all into one book and staying within whatever the page limits of a published book are. And I think that George is just grappling with the fact that he really might have to split it into 2 books. Like, we might have to go from 7 to 8, or as times change and we adapt, there's no reason why George should feel like he has to put out a traditional book. He could release it piecemeal, or he could release a smaller companion book just with Dany chapters, or a mix of Dany, Barristan, Tyrion, and Victarion chapters, just getting the Marine stuff up to date with what's happening in Westeros, and then from there drop Winds of Winter with just a couple chapters, with the normal amount of chapters that we would expect from those characters. It's just an idea. If anyone wants to float that to George, anyone high up who has George's ear, like, just tell him, like, yo, you don't have to stick to traditional formats anymore. Even if you release it chapter by chapter, we'll pay. I'll pay $2-3 for to read it, for download a chapter and buy it that way. Just, it's something. It really is something. Yes. I would also, he could expand it to 10 books for the main series, and I'd still buy them. Just produce something. And I've also said, like, on Twitter, that if George if putting out Fire and Blood 2 or Blood and Fire, if putting out another Dunk and Egg novella, if that helps in getting Winds out faster too, I wouldn't be mad about that either, because it's still something to go on. In fact, I'm very excited for Blood and Fire. One of the upcoming streams that I'm going to do in the future, I'm going to have Austin Flowers back. Excuse me. This Saturday, we're going to continue from where we left off with the Dragonstone Bastards, where we're going to actually start getting into the actual Blackfire Rebellions. But Austin's also coming back later. We're going to do a character study on Aegon III, the Broken King, who I think is one of the most interesting Targaryen kings as the first post-Dragon King, yet who still somehow kept Westeros together. And I have a lot of speculation about his later reign and the things that we would see in Fire and Blood too. So that's going to be a fun stream. But back on track. Let's go back to Mossovy. So Mossovy, as the Haunted Forest, brings up a lot of imagery of the others, the children of the forest, things of that nature. And then it also has its own lore, which are the Shapechangers and the Demon Hunters. And Shapechangers, that sounds a lot like wargs. And going back to my clusterfuck of quotes, here we go. Okay, so this is Jojen Reed and Bran. This is from Bran 5 and A Clash of Kings. Warg, Shapechanger, Beastling. That is what they will call you if they should ever hear of your wolf dreams. The names made him afraid again. Who will call me? Your own folk, in fear. Some will hate you if they know what you are. Some will even try to kill you. Old Nan told scary stories of beastlings and shapechangers sometimes. In the stories, they were always evil. I'm not like that, Bran said. I'm not. It's only dreams. The wolf dreams are no true dreams. You have your eyes closed tight whenever you're awake, but as you drift off, it flutters open and your soul seeks out its other half. The power is strong in you. So, here we have wargs being described as shape changers, along with the names of along with the other more colloquial name that we're more familiar with, the skin changers, as well as beastlings, and that wargs, especially south of the wall, wargs tend to be hunted down, and it can be by their own family. Now, north of the wall with the free folks, skin changers tend to be feared, but they're also a little more revered. And we see this with the Varamir Sixskins prologue. Varamir skin changes into a family dog, kills his younger brother. His father kills the dog while Varamir is still skin changing in it, and then he hears Varamir screaming because Varamir feels the pain of the dog when his father buries an axe into its head. And that's how his father finds out that Varamir is a skin changer. But he doesn't kill Varamir, which is something that we might expect south of the wall if this were to ever be discovered. But no, he takes him away and hands him off to other skin changers, and who he then grows up and learns from. And then he becomes the total dick that is Varamir Sixskins that we know, because he never takes any of the lessons to heart and breaks all of the sins, which is something that Bran is doing so far. He has warged into another person by taking over Hodor. He has consumed the flesh of men. Thankfully, young Bran has not committed the last taboo of banging another wolf while inside of his wolf, but that's something Varamir did. And I know we shouldn't kink shame, but I'm totally going to shame bestiality, okay? Shame zoophilia. That's a thing that deserves to be shamed, all right? But that's just gross, so let's get back. How do we get back from that? How do we get back on track from that? Okay, the hunting of skin changers and beastlings. That then takes us to the other notable thing of Mossovy, which is the demon hunters. And this would be people who hunt the shape changers or hunt the skin changers, hunt the wargs, hunt the green seers. It also would be in relation to the demon hunters among the Andals, the warrior son, who killed the children of the forest, which at the intro I said, they describe the children as demons. They're demons in their eyes. It doesn't matter what the children really are. They see them at demons. They see the old gods, them praying to the old gods, these trees, these false gods, these things that just go against the faith of the seven. And that's enough. That's enough to call these creatures demons, and that's enough to justify murdering them. Demon hunts. But another thing about demon hunters is in relation to the others, and the others are called demons of ice and snow. And again, I got another quote, which I'm sure I did. I really should have bolded some words here. Okay, here we go. This is from Samwell 5 in A Storm of Swords. Melisandre smiled. Necromancy animates these wights, yet they are still only dead flesh. Steel and fire will serve for them. The ones you call the others are something more. Demons made of snow and ice and cold, said Stannis Baratheon. The ancient enemy. The only enemy that matters. So, demons made of snow and ice and cold. And Mossovy sits beyond the five forts. And when we think like the Long Night, it seems to be a worldwide event. That the Long Night that befell Westeros also befell Essos in the time of the Bloodstone Emperor. And whatever cataclysmic event caused Ashai to just become totally fucked in the way that Ashai is. The demons of the Lion of the Night, it's possible they refer to all these weird things out in the Far East, like the Winged Men and the Bloodless Men and the Shrikes and all the other weird things. But they could be referring to others coming out of the Grey Waste. Because the Grey Waste is this vast frozen desert. Just in the way that Mossovy is Essos's answer to the Haunted Forest, the Grey Waste is like Essos's answer to the Lands of Always Winter. So you have like this idea that maybe the others came out of the Grey Waste and needed to get past the five forts. But if this is true, if we accept that as fact, that the Long Night happened on Essos and that there were White Walkers in Essos, well then demon hunters, that sounds like somebody you want to have on your side. Which again leads me back to the fact that the way to Mossovy is open, and it runs you go through Nagai, you go above the Bleeding Sea through Nagai, you're in Mossovy. The land route is not blocked off. The other thing that makes it interesting is how Melisandre's talk of necromancy. Well, Nagai and the secret city in Nefer is known as a haunt for necromancers. So you have the demon hunters in the land, next to the land of necromancers, next to the great, all leading into the great empire of the Dawn. They line up, and it seems like that's why it makes me think that, and we know that Nefer was part of the great empire of the Dawn because of, well, I shouldn't say we know, but but it seems like Nefer and Nagai were once part of the great empire of the Dawn because of these names these other names that we have for Azor Ahai, the regional names, like Harkum the Hero, which is the patrimony of Harkum. Azor Ahai seems to be like Ashai, Stagai, even Quaith. Like these AI suffixes tend to be a thing with the Shadowlands. You have Yintar, which is Yiti, and you have Nefarion, which sounds like Nefer. And then there's the outlier, which is Eldrick Shadowchaser. Now, to me, and this was a theory that I had a while ago, and I could never really make it work, but Eldrick Shadowchaser doesn't sound like there's no place that seems to have a regional name, like not the way that Yintar lines up with Yt or Harkum the Hero lines up with Patrimony of Harkum. In fact, Eldrick Shadowchaser sounds more Westerosi than anything. It sounds, especially like it sounds like what we would see among the Starks and the Danes that have these Elric, Eddard, Ed-El naming variants. We also see that a little bit in the Iron Islands. There's Edred Cod, and what is the name? I gotta look up this guy's name real quick. Wiki of Ice and Fire. He's known as the Merlin in the Iron Islands. Is it Meldred? Okay, so there's Eldred Cod and Meldred Merlin in the Iron Islands. Cod and Merlin. So fish people. And so yes, along with the talk of the others and Children of the Forest, because I've already talked about the Thousand Islands being the other thing that borders Mossovy, we're going to bring in some squishers. We're going to bring in squishers. Nibble Dick Crab is screaming from across the Sunset Sea at Squisher Talk, because there's definitely some Squisher stuff going on either in Mossovy or at least around Mossovy, because it's bordered by its border with the Thousand Islands. So Ed, El, these are names that we see in House Dane and in House Stark. And I've already talked about House Dane and House Hightower and the Iron Islanders all seem like they're lumped in with the First Men, but they're so characteristically different from the First Men. It's like First Men that aren't really First Men. And that is why that's why it makes me think of this whole First Men of the East. And the problem that I have with the First Men, it's just the name alone. Okay, so Westeros, the First Men, the Andals, the Rhoynar. Andals and Rhoynar, okay, you can trace that to a geographic region. The Andals, Andalos, and the Axe, the Rhoynar, the River Rhoyne. First Men is vague. It's so very vague. It sounds like they literally could have come from anywhere. The other thing that doesn't make sense with the First Men is the Hammer of the Waters. And yeah, First Men who don't worship trees. And the worshipping of trees is not an original First Men thing to begin with, because the First Men gave up their gods and started worshiping, at least the First Men that we know, gave up their gods and started worshiping the gods of the Children of the Forest, these gods of tree and stone, which is a whole other thing. Because for you to give up your native religion and to start worshiping the gods of another, if it's not done through force and subjugation, like forced conversion, which it doesn't seem like it happened with the children, because the children didn't have the numbers to beat the First Men. So there's no way they're the children performing mass forced conversions on the First Men. It seems like the First Men willingly gave up their own original native gods in exchange for worshiping the Children of the Forest. And for that to happen, for them to willingly give up their own original religion and to adopt the religion of another, then that kind of implies that there's something to these old gods, something more real, I'd like to say. I don't know. What I will say, though, is when it comes to the idea of gods being real in A Song of Ice and Fire, I will say that the old gods and R'hllor do tend to be having a firmer hand on the story than, say, the Seven. The Seven don't seem to be like the faith of the Seven, as far as religion goes, seems to be kind of on the weak, seems to be the weak sauce religion. Like, we don't really, it doesn't seem like the Seven are playing into, have as deep a hold of the story. Now, maybe they do. The Stranger, if there is, it would be the Stranger, because there are a lot of things that are attributed to the Seven, especially in Fire and Blood, like the story of the 30-foot shadow baby that was said to be the warrior incarnate that killed some dragons. Yeah, it depends on how you define gods. It seems to be more of these Lovecraftian elements that George is placing on the story. Again, if you see my other streams, though, I'm a big Lovecraft fan. Note it. Compare this stream to the old streams. I kind of really updated the setup, got some better lighting, and put some actual artwork up, so it looks like somebody actually lives in this room now. But I've done a lot of Lovecraft stuff, both with Dave as a guest stream on David Lightbringer's channel, and if you want to check out my older streams, Carcosa and Beyond, and Hastur and Euron, where I was doing a lot of Euron and the King in Yellow and a lot of Lovecraft and his contemporaries. Is that the old gods are actually real, or that they're not actually gods? Yeah, it could be more like maybe like demigods, just something that's above humans, but not divine. Just like just like the giants and the children of the forest and the others themselves, like perhaps just another form of life that just somehow has more mystical elements to it than humans, which is not unheard of in fantasy. This is going all the way back to Tolkien. Like the elves and the dwarves are distinct from humans and definitely have more fantastical traits than humans, but they aren't gods. They aren't divine. They can't just uproot the world the way a god could. The closest I'd say we get to that as far as humanity would be whatever Euron's doing. But I'm also of the opinion that Euron could just as easily might just get, when Euron finally gets what he wants, I call it opening the chaos door is what Euron's doing. He could just immediately be steamrolled by whatever's laid behind and just become something I've talked about with Euron, is that the idea of Euron in later chapters, if he becomes like a Night's King figure, a leader of the others, Euron might not be the one really at the helm. He might be like Borged, or just like something takes over Euron and it's just driving him forward. The same way that something seems to be kind of driving Victarion forward right now, in the way that Victarion, after he gets his cool firearms, his chapters are no longer from a first-person perspective, but a third-person. Another thing is that after Victarion gets his cool firearm, he's not as dumb anymore. The thing about Victarion is, as dumb as he is, he's always had some good insight, which makes Victarion chapters so fun. But he actually seems to be more, not to say he's become a genius, but he just doesn't seem as stupid anymore, at least not from the sample chapter that we're given of him. Although he definitely still is having thoughts of giving that horn a blow, even though he knows that he saw what it did to Euron's guy that did it. Okay, so, but circling back to Mossovy, one thing that I think might be one thing that I want to talk about was when we think of these Shapechangers and demon hunters, and especially if we think of Mossovy as being Russia as real world inspiration, George definitely picks up on. He uses a lot of myth, Celtic myth, Nordic myth, Vedic myth, but when I was researching Mossovy as a Russia parallel, that led me into looking at Slavic myth. And when I was looking at Shapechangers in Slavic myth, one thing that I came across was this creature called the Lashai. And once I bring up the picture of the Lashai, and once I start describing it, I think you'll immediately know what I'm gonna get at here. So okay, so This is Lashai. This is by Godofrede. Godofrede. I might butcher some of these artists' names. It's very Slavic. But the Lashai is a shape changer in Slavic myth, and they are deeply associated with bears and wolves. And the thing about the Lashai is that their size is determined by the trees. So they can be, at times, they can be giants, as tall as the hugest oak, or they can be as small as a blade of grass. But the thing is, they're shapeshifters. They really can be whatever they want to be, and they're like a guardian of the forest. They govern the forest. They govern the hunting that's allowed in the forest. They commune with animals, and they're tricksters. And they're noted for having pale skin and these green hair, green beards, horns, and these bright green eyes. That's wrapped up all into one. We got others with the pale skin and the others as the bright blue eyes. We've got green men, we've got horn men, and we've got children of the forest, all wrapped into one creature. And I got a couple other pictures of the Lashai that I would like to share, just to give a more of an idea. So this is by Conrad Langa. We see this more as definitely more of a green man, horn man Lashai, also with the wooden staff and the white beard. When the Lashai, the wooden staff is interesting, especially when we couple one myth of the Lashai is that when the Lashai takes a human form, he is the Lashai in a human form. It's known as the Old Man of the Forest. In this form, his skin is rough like tree bark. His blood is blue, which adds a hue to his skin color. That's more other talk. When he walks, he causes the wind to blow through the trees. He's usually dressed in a kaftan and carries an osier, which is like a willow walking stick, and he'll have long white hair and a beard. And now there's a number of characters that we can kind of pick up on, but when I first read that description, the one that, especially when I was thinking First Men of the East and how that plays into the Ironborn, made me think of, where was it? Galen Whitestaff. Galen Whitestaff is a priest of the drowned god in the Iron Islands, and he is famous for calling the first King's Moot. And the winner of that first King's Moot was Uros Grey Iron, who's also known as Uros Ironfoot. And after Uros passes, his son, Eric Grey Iron, so again, we kind of have like this Ed, L, Air naming variant. Eric Grey Iron, who's known as Eric the Ugly by Galen, he seizes the crown upon his father's death rather than abiding by another King's Moot. And that pisses Galen Whitestaff off. And Galen calls all the kings and captains to unmake Eric the Ugly and call for his death. And Eric, seeing that the tide was blowing against him, he willingly gives up the crown, and another King's Moot is held, and we end up with a drum as the next winner of the King's Moot. And Galen Whitestaff carried around this walking stick. It could have been a driftwood, but some people say it, or some attribute it as one of the bones of Nagga, and then others attribute it as a Weirwood staff. And he would use this to hit the ungodly, just walking around, just beating people for not worshiping the drowned god, not worshiping correctly. So when I saw this picture of the Lashai, it made me think of, with his long white beard and everything made of his clothing made of wood and this walking stick. It definitely made me think of Galen Whitestaff. Other little bits about the Lashai is that they can disappear into the woodland background and only their voices are heard. And this will be like you'll hear laughter, whistling, sounds of wind blowing, leaves rustling, and scratching trees. And then that stood out to me when we couple it with this quote about the others from the prologue in A Game of Thrones. When Waymar Royce is confronted by the others, the woods gave answer. The rustle of leaves, the icy rush of the stream, a distant hoot of a snow owl. The others made no sound. Will saw movement from the corner of his eye, pale shapes gliding through the wood. He turned his head, glimpsed a white shadow in the darkness. Then it was gone. Branches stirred gently in the wind, scratching at one another with wooden fingers. Will opened his mouth to call down a warning, and the words seemed to freeze in his throat. Perhaps he was wrong. Perhaps it had only been a bird, a reflection on the snow, some trick of the moonlight. What had he seen after all? So the Lashai have some definite others parallel with that. The way that they're able to just disappear back into the forest and just leave like these unnerving sounds, the sounds of just wind blowing, leaves rustling, trees scratching. There's a lot of other imagery in there. And so I just want to show one last picture of the Lashai. This one. And this is Wild Hunt by Nora Portwara, if I'm not butchering that name. And we can see like the Lashai, the wolves, and they also just to keep hammering it home, we got some crows or possibly some ravens too. But yeah, definitely the Lashai as a horned man, green man, pack of wolves. It's just so much wrapped into so much of what we think of in the haunted forest and the children, the green seers, and the others, and it's all wrapped into one. And one of the last things about the Lashai is that if you piss them off, they can be tricksters, but mostly they're tricksters, but there's definitely a malevolent side to them. And if you piss the Lashai off, they're known for two things. They will either lead you into a wasteland where you will starve to death, or they will take you to the nearest swamp or bog and drown you. Now, again, this brings me back to how I was harping so much on Mossovy's placement relatives. Drowning you, and Mossovy borders the Thousand Islands, where the inhabitants drown sailors as sacrifices to their Squamish fish head gods, or leading you into a wasteland. The other thing next to Mossovy is the Grey Waste. So the idea is that the Lashai, depending on where you run into them in the forest, might take you up towards in the guise of leading you through the forest, may actually be taking you to the Thousand Islands to drown you, or hand you off to people that will drown you, or may lead you down into the Grey Waste and abandon you there. And that brings us to, and then there was another creature from Slavic folklore, Slavic myth that I want to talk about that kind of factors in all this, especially more with the Thousand Islands, and that is the Vodnoi. And I'll bring up a picture of the Vodnoi. Okay, so here we go. This is the Vodnoi. And these are water spirits. And you can definitely see like the squisher imagery, but also sounds a lot like the drowned god of iron from the Ironborn religion. These are creatures made of hair and beard of seaweed and algae and fish scales and webbed hands and all of that. And the Vodnoi love to drown people, which is a big thing in the Ironborn religion. Drown men, drowning people coming back from drowning is a whole big thing that plays into the Ironborn religion. Vodnoi means he from the water. Said to appear as a naked old man with a frog-like face, greenish beard, and long hair, with his body covered in algae and muck, usually covered in black fish scales. Consequently, is often dubbed grandfather or forefather by the local people. Local drownings are said to be the work of the Vodnoi. When angered, the Vodnoi breaks dams, washes down water mills, and drowns people and animals. Consequently, fishermen will make sacrifices to appease him. The Vodnoi would sometimes drag people down to his underwater dwelling to serve him as slaves. And in the Russian north, it is believed that Vodnois have a ruler, the Tsar Vodniak, or the Vodyan Tsar. He is described as an old man armed with a club who can rise to the sky, sitting on a black cloud, and he creates new rivers and lakes. So there's a lot of drowned god imagery in that. And another interesting thing is there's two Slavic gods that I also want to bring up, which are Vodin and Velis. Just real quick, I do want to show this, another depiction of the Vodnoi with his green hair sitting on black. This picture is more reminiscent of one of the more famous pictures of Cthulhu sitting outside of the city of Ryla. Also, he just looks like a real Rob Zombie looking motherfucker in this picture. But yeah, you can see just in the depiction of him, and compare that to depictions of the drowned god of Ironborn. And then these two gods from Slavic myth that I want to bring up. One is Vodin, who is depicted as a Vodnoi in this picture. So Vodin is a god of streams and rivers. And then there's another god, god of the water, but also of the underworld, and that is Veles, Veles. Whoops, and before I forget, let me bring that up. So this Vodin as a Vodnoi is by Koshe Bezmertirny. Excuse me. So let me take a little sip of my tea here. I got a green tea with honey, and I drink it from a skull glass. So I'm invoking Lothar Longspoon. He was the ET emperor who feasted on the brains of his enemies after the skull had been removed. detracting here again. I'm actually very excited for the Yi animated feature that's coming up, because my interest lies so much in this whole Far East stuff. The idea that there's a Yi show with the seal of approval of George, which is good enough for me as far as canon goes. This is going to be our best chance to see all of this stuff out in the East. That and the Corlys Velaryon show, the Corlys spinoff after House of the Dragon, because Corlys, if we get to, that's going to be our best chance to see places like the Thousand Islands, Ashai, and Nagga actually on screen. So yeah, I'm actually very excited. I think once the Yi show drops, I'm probably just gonna, depending on how they do it, I'm probably gonna have content for days. Just things that I'm gonna want to like just go dive into more. So I'm hoping for the best, hoping for the wins of winter, but also hoping that these shows and these spinoffs are a success. Okay, so anyway, so back to the other Slavic god, which is Veles, Veles. This is a Slavic god of water and the underworld, and this picture is by Slovansky Bogovi. And here he is, and you definitely see him depicted as a sort of horned green man. And also depicted as a Lashai. And this is a god of water, but also god of the underworld. And you also see the bear in the background, the other creature that the Lashai, along with wolves, the other thing that the Lashai are very famous for shapeshifting. And of course, since we're talking Russia, so bears are just going to be par for the course with that one. And Veles is a water god, but his enemy is another Slavic god named Perun, Perun, and Perun is a thunder god. So here we have, in Slavic mythology, a water god who wars against a storm god, which is a god of the water in the underworld, so drowned god, warring against a god of wind, a god of thunder, a storm god. And that's just something that pops up a lot throughout mythology, is water god tends to war with the storm god. And when we did the Euron stream, we were talking about the same thing when August Derleth tried to establish his pantheon of gods in the Cthulhu mythos and had Hastur be a wind god. And one of the things I picked up with Euron Greyjoy as a possible king in yellow Hastur, being an avatar for that, is the fact that Hastur is the enemy of Cthulhu, who is the definite influence, inspiration for the drowned god, and he's a storm god and a wind god. And Euron seems to be able to, whether through sacrifice, the reason that Euron is able to travel so many places so fast, or at least claim to, is he seems to just always be able to get wind in his sails, which is something that is, again, wind associated with Hastur, a god of cosmic winds. So, and this is also, again, like there's so much just Ironborn imagery, and again, like I blame a lot of this on the Disputed Lands, Crowfoot's daughter. I never really liked, when I first started reading these stories, I never really cared for the Ironborn, but now the Ironborn to me becomes such they permeate like nearly every stream that I've done, especially Euron and all, because of all the Lovecraftian things. But again, because of this whole First Men of the East thing, and the idea that the Ironborn reject the idea that they're first men, that they claim that they come from the sea. And going back to from the Euron stream, when I was reading Lord Gilbert Farwin's Kingsmoot speech, when he was talking about setting sail out west to lands uncharted, Gilbert might be onto something. Like he's kind of pushed over and looked down upon because of how the Farwinds are, how queer they're queer, as in strange, the classic definition of the term, the way George would use it in the book. But the thing that stands out to me is that Gilbert might be more onto something than the Ironborn are giving him credit for. This idea that they may have actually come from the West. Not that they rose out of the ocean, but definitely came from across the sea, rather than the first men we know of who crossed the land bridge over the Arm of Dorne. And I focus on these 3 islands in the Sunset Sea, and I also focus on the Great Empire of the Great Empire of Dawn and the fall. Now, going back to Fall of Empires and what we're talking about with people groups, another thing that you got to remember with when an empire falls, the idea that everyone fled west over the bones is not that's not logical. That doesn't work from logistics, because if you were living on the eastern ends of the Great Empire and the empire is fracturing and there's the whole place is wrought with danger, if you were already living like in Nagga, then the idea of going west across the entirety of the center and then western part of the Great Empire as it's falling apart, and then to get over the bones. No, it seems more like if the lands open to Mossovy are already open, going east is going further east is gonna be, seems like the more logical course. Or if you're down in the Shadowlands, if you're going west, first you got to get over the mountains of the Morn, then you got to go again across the entirety of the Great Empire while it's in this state of upheaval, just to get to another even worse mountain range of the bones. So for me, it seems like when the Great Empire collapses, the people couldn't have just scattered to the west. They had to have scattered in all different directions. Some go west, some go east, some go north, some go south. The people that are living on the eastern ends of the empire, when the cataclysm happened, when the empire starts to crumble, going further east to escape things seems like the more logistical option. Sometimes, like, even with the dangers out there, even with the monsters. But again, when we're thinking of this is all hearsay. This is what the maesters of Westeros say are out there, because they're getting secondhand knowledge from people that have been out there, and which are usually going to be like sailors or travelers who return. And we're told that sailors are very superstitious people. So, and it seems more like if you're already, the people that would actually be living there probably have a better idea of what's truly out there, whether it actually is monsters or whether it's just people, like the free folk, like the wildlings are just people. Another thing that we know is that there is knowledge of these lands that are unknown to Westeros and the Maesters of Westeros, but are known to other people. Like the Thousand Islands are not actually 1,000 islands. They're more like 300. And that is because of the knowledge of Ibonese map makers. Or Sithorios. Nobody knows where the end of Sithorios is, but the Summer Islanders have it mapped. So they probably know what's further south of the Green Hell, which is like the furthest south of Sithorios that we are given knowledge to, because that's all the maesters have. And this is a common thing in history with exploration. So much of the age of exploration was based on people trying to find trade routes to China while avoiding the Silk Road and having to pay the taxes that go over the land route. So you have like the Portuguese and the Dutch finding new routes, sailing south of Africa, and they kept that secret for years because it gave them an economic advantage until other people discovered these same routes too, and then it became a free-for-all, or they just wailed on the Portuguese and Dutch and said, "Tell me what you know, tell me what you know, tell me what you know." Same idea. Summer Islanders probably know more about Sithorios than they're letting on. They probably know where it ends and how to get around it. Same with the Ibonese. In the way that they know that the 1,000 Islands are really just 300, they probably have a better idea of what's really in the Shivering Sea, what's really in the East, because they're the ones that would be the ones going out there and actually making trade with these places in the Shivering Sea. So same with the people living in the Great Empire, the Dawn. They would have a better idea of what's truly out east and whether the danger is worth it to go further east. And if it is, even if we accept that the Shrikes and the Bloodless Men and the Winged Men are real, that still doesn't change the fact that the way to Mossovy is still open. And again, like I said, so much of where just the placement of Mossovy on the map creates so much opportunity. The fact that it's not blocked off by these forts or by these natural barriers like lakes and mountains, the way that the Shadowlands and the Grey Waste are. It seems like the way is more open. And if Mossovy is been visited by Sarnori ships, then that implies that there's ports. The last great port that we know of is the one in Nefer that Corlys visited, and that's what the Maesters claim is the last port of note. But again, Corlys did not make it to Mossovy. Had he made it past the 1,000 Islands, he probably would have found ports along the Shivering Sea on the coast of Mossovy, where the Sarnori ships in the past would have been docking when they made trade with Mossovy. So that right there gives us a launching point from Mossovy for where ships can go even further east. And if we go further east with the idea that the world is round, then they're probably sailing into the Sunset Sea. And then east eventually becomes west. And we get these islands, these 3 islands of now Visenya, Rhaenys, and Aegon, and they become docking islands. Let loose some pigs, let loose some breeding pairs, let them breed, come back, got a whole bunch of pigs and lizards, and this is what you hunt and you stock up on, and then you continue your travels, and then eventually you reach Westeros, and you reach the Iron Islands, and you reach the Whispering Sound, where you establish your holdout on Battle Isle, and you build your fused Blackstone structure with its mazes, which then they build a wooden tower on. Or you follow the comet to the island of Starfall in the middle of the Torrentine. Again, these are people establishing settlements on islands, yet they are lumped into another group of people who we are told were not seafarers. So something's not adding up. And it makes me think that, and again, First Men, very, very vague, and the breaking of the Arm of Dorne doesn't make sense because the damage had already been done. If the First Men had already crossed the Arm of Dorne, why is it? What good does breaking the arm after they've already crossed in? The damage had been done. They're already there. So for me, like, it seems like these First Men, that one, that came in waves, 2, that they came in from, that they were made up of separate, distinct people groups, different ethnic groups, and 3, that they came from all different directions, not just west of the Arm of Dorne, but some may have sailed from the east, or some may have crossed a northern passage while it was like again, Icebridge, Beringia, before the time of the Long Night, when the lands of Always Winter were still habitable. And that's how we get House Dane, House Hightower, and the Ironborn. Just these groups that are lumped in with First Men, but are so characteristically distinct from the First Men. And maybe they rode over on dragons too, because we got the fused black stone that makes up the base of the high tower on Battle Isle. And then there's also the oily black stone that's carved. Now again, fused black stones, dragon fire melted together, carved seems like another thing, chiseled, carved, chiseled, crafted. The sea stone chair, which is in the form of a kraken, which may have been carved by squishers. Now, I had talked about how the Thousand Islands were a parallel to the Stepstones, but they also are a parallel to the Iron Islands as well. Thousand Islands are like the Iron Islands taken to an extreme, because Iron Islanders claim that they come from the sea, that they are descended of merlins and sea creatures. And Iron Islanders, they got their own religion. There's like a religious intolerance and a bit of xenophobia. And the way that the Iron Islanders like to see themselves as distinct from First Men, distinct from the people from the Greenlands that they call them. Thousand Islands, same thing. These are a very xenophobic people. They sacrifice sailors, they drown outsiders. So they're not. So it's like Ironborn xenophobia taken to its most extreme, and Ironborn ideas of being descended from the sea taken to its most extreme. There's that's another foil for the Thousand Islands. I just want to take another sip of my tea here again. But yeah, island hopping via dragon, or ship, or Weirwood ship, and that's Nagga's bones. The idea that Nagga's bones are the remains of a capsized ship, and because there's the other thing with the Ironborn. Now, the Ironborn longships, these are ships. They don't really, because the Iron Islands don't really have proper docks, because they have these longships that kind of beach up on the sand, and that's what Asha does when she reaches Sea Dragon Point when they try to take the north. Some of her longships are towed up onto the beach, and then others are left out in the water should they need to make a quick escape. But a ship that would be that if Nagga's bones are the remains of a Weirwood ship, that's a ship that would require a dock. But for it to be ribbed up like that, kind of looks like the boat capsized. And I think that's another thing that might have happened, how like some of the original Islanders might have reached there, is it may have been a shipwreck on the Iron Islands, and that survivors just kind of get whatever survivors come out, and they're like, okay, I guess we'll make do with this. And that could be the original origins of the Ironborn, was just a unfortunate seafaring accident, a capsized Weirwood ship coming from the west, or the east, however, coming from west of the Sunset Sea from the lands of the further east, because the world is round in directions. That's where I see like Ironborn and Ironborn coming from is like. And the other thing that's interesting too is that out in the Far East, there's also Carcosa. We've talked about Carcosa and Hastur being an enemy of Cthulhu. And then the Ironborn worship the Drowned God, which is Cthulhu. And it seems really interesting that you kind of have like this Hastur in the Far East, and then the Drowned God Cthulhu in the Iron Islands, which is like the westernmost part of Westeros. It's almost like two factions of the same of a greater religion, like the Hastur worshippers or the Protestants, and the Ironborn or the Catholics. It's like just worshiping different. It's all part of this greater Lovecraftian eldritch abomination religion, but they're worshiping the wind one, the storm one, and the god of cosmic winds out in the east. But then on the iron, they're like, no, we're going with the water one. And that plays again with this duology of Euron as a Hastur representative, and the rejection of Ironborn religion. This is the way my mind works. These are the thoughts that I get on. I get like we're an hour and 35 minutes in on a stream about a place that has 3 sentences written about it, and look at the entire world I've crafted from it. And we haven't even talked about the whole the warg thing, which is the other bit of Shapechanger. And now Shapechanger, again, in the line that we read from Jojen Reed in his talks with Bran, Shapechanger is a term used to talk about wargs. And wargs are a big thing in the North. All of the Stark children are said to be skin changers. Some don't know it, like Sansa. Sansa hasn't discovered her skin changer ability, but I think she might skin change some birds in the Vale. Robb never knew about it, but it is possible that Robb did have a second life in his direwolf, but then was just immediately killed again at the Red Wedding. But the thing about the warging and Starks is that when we think about the Stark history, wargs come into the picture with the Warg King, who established himself at Sea Dragon Point. And he was defeated by the Starks, and who then took his daughters to bride. And this is a common thing with the Stark family. And I talked about this on the Crypts of Winterfell stream with Lucifer Means Lightbringer. What makes the Starks so powerful, it doesn't seem like they themselves may have been intrinsically magic, but it was the magic bloodlines they picked up along the way as they were conquering the North, subjugating, subduing, or just gaining allies. However they did it. But the Starks, they marry the daughters of the Warg King, just as they marry the daughters of the Marsh King and the Neck, the Cranach men, and all of their children of the forest magic. Because the Cranach men seem to have interbred with the children of the forest. There's the Barrow Kings. Night's Queen is said, one maester reasoning for what Night's Queen was that she may have been the daughter of the Barrow King. The Barrow Kings being associated with death. And then there's also the whole blood of the other theory that the Starks are descended from others, and that's with the Night's King and Night's Queen theory. I talk a lot of this stuff. We talk a lot of this in the Crypts of Winterfell stream, so go check that out for more on that. But there's 2 places in the North but along with that is Sea Dragon Point is also important to the Ironborn. Same with Cape Kraken. These are both northern cities that they belong to the North, but they have changed hands with the North and the Ironborn so much that the people living in them may have more, like the Maesters say, the people of Cape Kraken seem to have more blood ties with the Ironborn than the actual North. And Sea Dragon, and one idea that I had is like, well, where wargs come from? If they come from, and if Mossovy is a land of Shapechangers, and if we have already had this first men of the East theory, then possibly one of the first men who settled the North may have been people coming from the far east, and Mossovy seems like a place where they may have sailed from. That wargs, skin changers, shape changers from the forests of Mossovy may have fled in the fall of the Great Empire, and also fleeing from demon hunters, because again, demon hunters could be because wargs are seen as monsters, as demons, as something to be killed, something to shun by other people. These are Jojen's words to Bran. For wargs to escape persecution, the Shapechangers of Mossovy, if they're going to flee, then they have fled further east eventually sailing over the Sunset Sea, and they land in places like Sea Dragon Point and Cape Kraken. And that might be how wargs come to the north. Or again, if there was this northern passage traveling down through the lands of Always Winter when they were still inhabitable, and settling in the north. Again, this is like the idea that First Men came in waves from different directions, that they didn't just cross the Arm of Dor and then start going north, but rather some may have come from the north, out of the northeast, and then started traveling south. And this might be another reason why the north is so distinct from the rest of Westeros. Which actually, no, scratch that, because the north is distinct from more likely distinct from Westeros because of how they handled the Andal invasion. But again, like we're just talking about like this possible First Men migrations, that they may have not all come from the western end of Essos, that some may have come from the east, the very, very far east, and the very, very far north. Even the others, there is some idea, one idea from the Maesters, which we know to not be true, but may play into another group, is that one group is what one Maester had said, that the others may have just been a group of Northmen more savage than the others, than other Northmen groups, and were competing over limited resources, and they have been making their homes in the more frigid northern areas and were now fleeing south. Now, we know that's not, because we know that the others are a real thing. But there are the free folk who are fleeing south in an escape from the others. Another thing that's interesting about Mossovy is, again, because of the open land route, if we look at the Far East, if we're to assume that everything past the Five Forts is filled with monsters and savages, the same way that the people of Westeros view everything north of the Wall, the free folk, the wildlings. But to have Mossovy still open, there's the idea of the noble savage. Now, pushing away all of the racial baggage with that term and focusing it on the story, we do see this with some of the free folk groups. I tend to think of the Thens, and again, I'm talking book Thens, not show Thens. The show Thens, they're the ones that they made them the bald guys with the scarred skin and who were cannibals. In the books, is the Ice River clans who are the cannibals. The Thens are a free folk group who also have a code of law. They have their Magnar, who they see as a god, who's more like, like a lord, like a king. And they're known for working bronze, which they take a lot of pride in. So the Thens are like a group of wildlings that would actually transition very well into life south of the Wall. And we actually do see this because when the Magnar of Then, what is his name? I just want to check on the one who marries Alice Karstark. Sigorn. Okay, Sigorn. So Sigorn marries Alice Karstark in a R'hllor wedding. And the Thens, they already have a house sigil. They adopt the white son of the Karstarks, and they use it as a red son of R'hllor in a bronze band, which celebrates their bronze working. So again, it's like, so the Thens, by having a code of law, by already having a lord, by being bronze workers, and by establishing a sigil, and then Sigorn readily taking to his wife and actually being very tender with her. They seem like, as far as the wildlings, the free folk that are being granted access to the South, that are being given lordships and titles by Stannis, and allowed to pass down by Jon. The Thenns seem like the ones who are going to be, I would say, would be the free folk house that's going to be the most successful. Mossovy, being in the Far East, it being one of these places that happens to be on the wrong side of the forts, but also still being open, seems like they'd be like the Thenns of the East, which is a people who, despite not being on the correct side of this barrier, would still be a people that would transition very well, or at least work very well. And that's why I said, like, if Mossovy wasn't part of the Great Empire proper, then being a vassal state, the same way that the Muscovite kingdoms, that the old Russian kingdoms, Kievan Rus days, were vassals to the Mongol Empire, seems like it just seems to work, just on a historical level, just on a level of political and trade and just how people groups tend to work in general. Same with House. Then there's House Redbeard, which is another one, but they also seem to be like more readily willing to adopt Southern customs just to get south. But yeah, I think of Mossovy the way I would think of the Thenns. Same way the raiders out of the Grey Waste are like the wildlings in general. These people living in this frozen, barren wasteland, trying to survive, trying to get across the hurdle that is preventing them from living their best lives and being chased by whatever the fuck monsters are out in the unknown. Excuse me. I think I'm coming down with a cold, sorry. Spending too much time in these frozen forests. But yeah, so like I said at the beginning, these few lines alone, when you take the little bit of information that we're given about Mossovy, but then you compare it to the places that we do know, you look at the foils and the parallels, there is a lot to garner from it. And especially when we think of like first men of these first men houses like Hightowers, Danes, and the entirety of the Ironborn, who just do not fit the first men mold, yet are constantly lumped in with them. And the last thing that I want to get to for this stream, were there any other photos I wanted to? Because I did have a lot of photos. I think we kind of covered everything, even without the others. Okay. So the last thing I want to get to is going back to this Azor Ahai myth and the regional variants on the name. Now, this was a scrapped theory of mine, but one idea that I had about the Eldritch Shadow Chaser name, since it doesn't fit in the regional naming schemes that the others do, like Yintar and Yiti, I was thinking maybe it could have been a place in the Far East, could have been Mossovy. And I was thinking of, in real world, Russian naming variants. Because Russia is a country that its history has been very much influenced by Vikings, which they call which are in Russia, which would be the Varangians. And Viking mythology has such an impact on A Song of Ice and Fire, and Viking culture has such an impact on A Song of Ice and Fire. The North just screams Viking, just not just in British Isles and Celtic, but also like the North. We have hints of Scandinavia and Scott, just like, and the wildlings are basically Scots. Russia is another place that was deeply influenced by Vikings, and even some Russian naming variants still have this Scandinavian influence. names like Gleb, Igor, Oleg, Olga. These come from Gudlif, Ingvar, Helgi, and Helga, which are more Scandinavian. The Varangians, it is they formed some of their oldest settlements are like in Novgorod. This is a forming of a union of Scandinavians, Slavs, and Finno-Ugric peoples. Now, you take that idea and then couple it with the Song of Ice and Fire, with houses like House Stark and House Dane, and also some of these Iron Island houses that I had mentioned. This El, Ed, Air naming variation. So we have we have names like Elric, Edric, Alaric, Eddard, Edwin, Edwile, Edarian, Ulrich, just so many Eds and Ls. It's the Ed, and Eddies of Westeros. And so that got me thinking, like, okay, so Eldrick. Definitely some Stark. We see Stark and Dane influence, but with this whole but throwing in then the Iron Islands with like Eldred and Meldred and names of that nature, it seems like the Eldrick Shadow Chaser, the Eldrick naming variant, seems like something that could be something that also happens on the Far East. And it may have come from Mossovy. And then couple that with wargs being on Sea Dragon Point in the north. It just seems like some of these First Men groups, First Men of the East, settling not only the Iron Islands and the Whispering Sound and Dane, but may have made it to the stony shore of the north and have their own northern establishments. And that is why places like Sea Dragon Point and Cape Kraken, along with having their constant changes with constantly changing hands between Northmen and Ironborn, are such standouts. And then the last standout is on the other side of the north, Skagos. Again, Skagos and Skane, which is now uninhabited after the whole, whether we believe the idea that the Skagosi came and cannibalized everyone on Skane. But Skagos is an island. And we're back to what we said before with the problem of First Men not being seafaring people. Then how are they settling on islands? And Skagos, the Skagosi, translates to Stoneborn. Stoneborn, Ironborn. And the Skagosi have always been a thorn in the north side. And it's funny because since they're on the eastern part of the north, and then the Iron Islands are on the western side of the north, it's like the north has two thorns in its side, from the Ironborn and from the Stoneborn. And the Skagosi were known for raiding the north. Just, there have been constant skirmishes between Skagos and the north, because the Skagosi have never really been I guess we would say good vassals to the north. No, the Skagosi are more independent. And that is why even the north like kind of disparages them. They call them Skags. They say they're more like wildlings than true Northmen. The Skagosi are wildly independent, and they used to they would raid the north until the north put an end to it and burn their ships and forbid them from raiding. And now the Skagosi make more they make their wares in trade, and trading like pelts and unicorn horns. But again, like it's up until the north really like brought the hammer down on them. They were acting more like Ironborn. So it's like the north was plagued with Ironborn on both sides of them because of the Skagosi. And that's what's going to make Rickon's story, because I don't really, Rickon's Shaggy Dog story, I think it's actually going to be quite interesting when the Skagosi come into play, because the Skagosi are not loyal to the North the way that the mountain clans are, the way that the Manderleys are. But the Skagosi also seem like they would hate the Boltons just as much as they would hate the Starks. So the Skagosi are actually the Skagosi are a wild card when they show up. But again, like this is another First Men group, but they're seafarers. So how do they get there? If the First Men are not a seafaring people, then how are they making it to islands? And it's not like Skagos is a hop, skip, and jump. It is open ocean that separates it from the north. It would require actual boats to get there. At least, maybe not huge ships, but definitely some long ships. Things that we are told that the first men, as we know them, did not have. So that's why I think that's what makes it First Men is so vague. It had to have been different groups of people. And some of the First Men would be seafarers, but these would not be the same First Men taking the land route over the Arm of Dorne. This would be a different group of people who just get lumped in with the First Men because the Maesters don't really have any other term to kind of throw at them because of how skewed the history is, because of how there are no written records of that. But that's just something I found interesting when I was reading The World of Ice and Fire, to see that Skagos means Stoneborn, and that they used to be raiders. It's like, okay, it's like more Ironborn, just on the opposite side of the north. And let's see. Were there any other quotes I wanted to read? Oh, okay. So another thing about Mossovy is, like, along with the haunted forest, there's also the forests of Deepwood Motte and the Wolf's Wood that it shares similarities with. We see these in like the Asha and Theon chapters. So we're never told what trees are in Mossovy, but the trees of the haunted forest, as well as the trees of Deepwood Motte and the Wolf's Wood, there's definite Weirwoods, of course, and the haunted forest is actually the only place where you see more than 2 or 3 Weirwoods growing in one spot. But it's also populated with black ironwood trees, as well as ash and oaks, and then soldier pines and sentinels. And George, using his play on words with all this wordplay, the soldier pines and sentinels also then get lumped in with the idea of the trees coming alive as soldiers. Asha saw only trees and shadows, the moonlit halls and snowy peaks. Then she realized that the trees were creeping closer. "Oh," she laughed, "these mountain goats have cloaked themselves in pine boughs." The woods were on the move, creeping toward the castle like a slow green tide. She thought back to a tale she had heard as a child about the children of the forest and their battles with the First Men, when the green seers turned the trees to warriors. And this lines up well with this idea of the others coming from the trees, that the trees become the soldiers. And then Mossovy, with its Shapechangers, and with the Lashai, and the Lashai being being able to meld back into the forest and being the protectors of the forest, being the governors of the forest, protecting the hunting. that the Lashai are the tree warriors of Mossovy from Slavic myth. And there's another one that I want to read. So that was an Asha chapter, and then from Theon chapter. This is from Theon 4 and A Clash of Kings when he's going through the Wolf's Wood. Wisps of pale mist threaded between the trees. Sentinels and soldier pines grew thick about here, and there was nothing as dark and gloomy as an evergreen forest. So the wording there lines up with what we're told about Mossovy, the dark, grim, gray forest. And this is more like, again, more others coming from the trees and nothing being as dark and gloomy. The end of the world being in the forest. And so couple that with another quote from the Game of Thrones prologue. A shadow emerged from the dark of the wood. It stood in front of Royce. Tall it was, and gaunt, and hard as old bones, with flesh pale as milk. Its armor seemed to change color as it moved. Here it was white as new fallen snow, there black as shadow. Everywhere dappled with the deep gray green of the trees. The patterns ran like moonlight on water with every step it took. And then gray and green are also, just as blue and white are the main colors for the others, gray and green are the colors most associated with the Lashai, the Shapechangers, and them being like the sort of children of the forest and woods walkers out of the dark forests of Mossovy. And then the other last thought I want to give on Mossovy is, when we think grim gray forests, gray being a combination of black and white. Now, the Haunted Forest is famous for being the only place that we know of where you can find massive groves of multiple weirwoods, like the Grove of Nine. The only place where more than 2 or 3 weirwoods are growing in one spot. Now, the inverse of the weirwoods are the shade of the evening trees. But we're never really given a spot where the shade of the evening trees grow. But there are a couple of places where it seems logical that they may be growing. One, of course, is Mossovy, which is what I'm getting at with the idea of it being grim gray. Mossovy could be a place in Essos where shade of the evening trees and weirwood trees are growing. Other spots in Essos where we might see shade of the evening trees and also weirwood trees growing would be the forest Cohort, which are not mapped. Cohort makes a lot of its money off of its logging industry, but what we're told that the deep parts of the forest are not mapped out. We don't truly know what's going on in the center of the forest because it remains unexplored. There's the forest of the Ifakevron, the Woods Walkers. Those seem to be like another Essos version of the Children of the Forest. And if they are an inverse of the Children of the Forest, if they're worshiping shade of the evening trees, then they'd be more like the Drows of anything. And then last is, this is an idea posed by Crowfoot's daughter, the Disputed Lands, in one of in her first video, which is, she notes, and I'll actually bring it up. It's on that photo of the map that I showed at the beginning when I was pointing out Mossovy, but Ulthos down here, the way Ulthos is drawn, the trees look black, and a shy being made of oily black stone. When we go off the idea that weirwood doesn't truly die, it petrifies. If shade of the evening trees have like the same properties as weirwood trees, if they don't die but petrify, then maybe the oily black stone that a shy is built from might actually be that it's built from petrified shade of the evening trees. And if shade of the evening tree forests are something on Ulthos, then they'd be easy to ship across these little saffron straits into the port of Ashai to then construct these cities. But shout out to Crowfoot's daughter. That's another one I'll have to go back into the video info and link that video too. When she brought up that just blew my mind. That Ulthos might be a place where Shade of the Evening forests might naturally grow. But I think Mossovy is another good candidate for Shade of the Evening trees. And to wrap it up, the other thing that I want to talk about is with Mossovy and the Haunted Forest being foils to one another. One thing that the Haunted Forest is doing is, as the Night's Watch has diminished, the Haunted Forest have been growing out of control. It said that like the men of the Night's Watch would fell the trees, use them for lumber, use them for construction. But as their numbers have dwindled, the forest is reclaiming the land and it's growing back, and the trees are almost touching the wall, which is really scary if others come from the trees and the trees are reclaiming the land. But on Mossovy and the far east of Essos, opposite. The far east, especially past the Bones, seems to be going through a form of desertification. The reason that the patrimony of Harkum has been reduced to the 3 sister cities is because of the dry times, and the dry times are still going on in Essos. The lakes are disappearing. Even when we go past the Bones and we get to the Dothraki Sea, even though it's a lush green grassland like a savanna, it used to be a massive ocean, or a massive sea, the Silver Sea, but it receded, and we're left with a vibrant, lush grassland, which is great. But go past the Bones, they're not getting that vibrant, lush grassland. They're getting deserts. So Patrimony Harkum has been reduced to these 3 cities. Yiti is in a constant state of upheaval because of natural disasters, because of the Jogos Nye constantly going, raids from the Jogos Nye, reavers from the Shadowland. A lot of this is just as in how the wildlings are trying to get across the wall to escape the others. Raiders and reavers coming out of the Grey Waste and the Shadowland is, if they're not running from monsters out of the east, then they're coming in because of because of scarcity and natural resources. And that's why Yiti is constantly getting attacked from all sides. From the Jogos Nye, who are a nomadic people who have their sources, which kind of have to rely on devil grass sometimes because of the scarcity up there, but also the reavers coming out of the Shadowlands because of the scarcity there. And then, yes, the ghost grass. Thank you. So again, looking at Mossovy, it sits atop the Grey Waste, and then there's all these deserts, the Cannibal Sands, the Dry Deep, Bone Town, the cities of the Bloodless Men, and the open plains of the land of the Shrikes, and Kadath sitting in the Grey Waste. And then we get to the Shadowlands. The Shadowlands are blighted, and they rely on fresh food and water being brought from the outskirts. But what does grow in the Shadowlands is ghost grass. And ghost grass is like it works like an invasive species. It just overtakes everything, kills all the life of all the plant life around it. And then it grows to be like 5 feet high. It's sharp as glass. Its stalks are sharp and white. It's not edible, so it can't even be used for anything. Yet that's all that grows. And there's the Dothraki legend that the world will be covered in ghost grass. So what you see in and now ghost grass is growing in the gardens of Karth. Zaros Daxos tells that to Dany the same time he tells her that the glass candles in Urathon Nightwalker's apartments are burning. And Urathon Nightwalker, of course, more than likely being an alias of Euron during his travels when he travels to Karth. So you have this massive desertification, and in the middle, followed by the only vegetation growing in the south being this ghost grass that is overtaking everything. So it's like the haunted forest is expanding and reclaiming the land as it reaches to the wall, whereas Mossovy might be actually receding. That green spot in that far northeast may be the only green spot that's left. It's possible that Mossovy is going through some terrible deforestation and desertification. And this could be George's one with the seasons being out of whack, but also a commentary on George about climate change. We know that George has used the story as a means of speaking out on issues like a war, refugee crises, but climate change is another one. And so if we think of the others as warriors of the forest, if they were created by the children of the forest as a means of fighting off men who were hacking down the trees, and the trees are warriors, then the same could be happening for Mossovy, only they're losing. The desert is winning out in the Far East. And it's affecting, and that would be affecting not only whatever others of the East there might be, but also the people. Like Patrimony Harkum has been reduced to just three cities. The people of the Grey Waste are fighting all they can to get out, and that is why they are that's why they're attacking the 5 forts, and Yeti's relying on the 5 forts. And I also got a whole other idea. I'm saving that for another video, maybe another stream or perhaps another video of the 5 forts and what condition they might be in, because I think the 5 forts might be more reminiscent of the wall than we think, because the 5 forts are said that each fort can house 1,000 men. But do they? Are all forts even are there 5,000 men across the 5 forts manning them, or have they fallen into a state of decline in the way that the wall has? Like this idea of a fortress that was constructed in the past to fight these monsters and demons, but is now a glorified security guard keeping out the barbarians out of the waste, in the same way that the wall is turned into a penal colony and is mainly just keeping out the free folk from the far north. I mean, it's possible. And the situation in Yeti with the 3 opposing emperors lines up quite nicely with the War of the 5 Kings. So what's going down at the 5 forts is going to be another topic we cover in the future. But yeah, so that's I think that's everything I want to go on with Mossovy. So you can see, like, we definitely covered a lot. We covered wargs, swords, shapechangers, demon hunters, but also squishers, children of the forest, white walkers. And just this idea of the seasons and climate change and deforestation, land reclamation, and also just the vast uncertainty, because we're relying solely on Maester knowledge, but how people living closer to these places probably know more. Like the men of Iv probably have a better idea, of what's going on in Mossovy and in the Shivering Sea. Maybe even know how to map the White Waste. The reason that a northern passage has not been found is because sailors who have gone looking for it, they sail into these northern seas trying to find this northern passage, but then they reach a point where the waters are so frozen they can't continue. But then they can't return back, and so they have to turn back, and they return frozen, and they say there's nothing out there. Or even worse, they can't turn back because the white waste recedes and then refreezes, and it recedes and it refreezes. This is like the Arctic. The Arctic and Antarctica are different. Antarctica is a proper continent. There is a land underneath the ice sheets, but the Arctic is an ice sheet that hugs land, like on the northern Russia and Scandinavia and Greenland and Canada. But for the most part, it's an ice sheet. It melts and then it refreezes, and then it melts and then it refreezes. So it's never. Nowadays, it's more melting nowadays, but fucking end of the world. But it's never always in one. It's never one piece, and that makes it hard to map unless you can know the seasons and can know and at least get an idea of the melting refreezing cycles. But we don't get that on Planetos because of how out of whack the seasons are. So navigating the white waste to try and find a northern passage to try and either get around the north or to get to the far east or to just go into the northernmost parts of the Sunset Sea, it's a crapshoot because it relies solely on luck. It relies on not hitting these frozen waters and not having the water behind you freeze because you just happen to have wandered in during a cycle of melting and refreezing. That's why we need another sea snake to get this stuff out there for us. Oh, hey, Austin. Yeah, I'm still streaming, but I am wrapping up. This is not going to be a 3.5 hour one. This was we weren't reading any short stories, so this one was a lot more concise, more discussion. We kept it solely Song of Ice and Fire related, while also diving into some Slavic mythology and some Russian Slavic history, mainly Russia and Mongols. I'm a huge. I will always say that I think that the Mongol Empire is the more logical stand-in for the great empire of the Dawn, more so than Rome, because of the way it fell, and also because the more eastern portions of it, with Yi being based off of Imperial China, and Leng being more like Taiwan. The Great Empire just screams more Golden Horde to me than Rome. But I will be streaming again on Saturday, hopefully. Austin's going to be my guest again, and that helps because having another person makes me more inclined to get it done because if I blow it off, well, then I'm also fucking up someone else's day. But not like Saturday, we just had technical issue. I was home alone and the dogs would not stop barking. Now, I would love to just bring them down into the den, but Damon's stuff is down in the den too, and I don't want them eating his food and rooting through his litter box. And the puppy just gets at everything, and I have a lot of you don't see them on camera because they're on the other side of the room, but I have a lot of very expensive choking hazards down in this room, which is why I don't want the puppy in here. If I ever am forced to stream from the living room, like if it becomes unavoidable and the only way I'm going to do is stream is if I set up shop in the living room or the kitchen, then we'll see Brody on camera. But for now, all you get is Damon, and that's when Damon feels like being around. Where is Damon? Damon! Oh, I wanted him to say goodbye. Oh, yeah, and yeah, Dothraki always calls more of the Mongol. Like, it's never, like I said in my year on stream and with streams, they're never perfect one-to-one ratios. There's always like a mix. But yeah, Dothraki are more like Mongols, but there's also a lot of Huns, Avars. Like it's a lot. But for me, Mossovy, just because of how little information we're giving it, Russia, specifically Kievan Rus history, and Varangian history, the Viking influence on Russia, then that playing in part to the First Men of the East theory, which then goes on to influence the Iron Islands and House Hightower and the Danes, and because House Hightower being more British history, in fact, because the first, wasn't it, I believe the first king of the Hightower who supposedly slew a dragon is based off of Arthurian legend. So yeah, just a lot of Viking influence. Vikings got around, even down into the Middle East. There's a bit of Viking influence. They got everywhere. Spain, so yeah, just Vikings got around. Those long ships sailed pretty damn far. But yeah, so it's all history. It's all remixed. And history is weird. And real world history is weird enough. And then you throw on the fantastic elements that George has done to just create like this great story. It's why even without having a book for the last 11 years, we can still talk about it. And again, like for me, because I do so much speculating and I'm looking at like these niche topics, I'm still talking about it. We're 2.5 hours almost on a place with 3 sentences because of George's world building, because of how we can relate it to real world history and to these people groups and cultures and mythology and history, and also just the foils that we can create with the other places that he's made that do have more information and more of a focus on them. But yeah, so I got topics for days, and really still holding out hope that Winds of Winter comes in some kind of format. Really, really hope that George makes it over the hump, that he gets the book out somehow, or releases it piecemeal, or just comes to terms with the idea that maybe he's not going to finish it in 7 books. Maybe we need 8 or 9, or like Dave's idea, make a companion book of just Marine chapters, just to push Dany's story along, just to get her up to date, something. But I am very excited about the shows. I'm very excited to see what they do with House of the Dragon, whatever extra bits that they want to put in. Very excited about the Corlys show. Very, very excited about the Yi animated series. Nymeria ships, because that's good. Oh man, didn't even mention Nymeria ships, because that's going to give us Thorios. So for people like me who want more information about these more out there the places that are never going to be in the main series, that we're only going to see in things like the World of Ice and Fire and companion books, the things that are only going to be mentioned in passing, that you just want more information. It's like, that, tell me more about that. You can't just put down Cities of the Bloodless Men and expect me not to want to know more about that. For people like me and who gravitate towards that kind of stuff, these shows are going to be just so much to eat. So much content coming out there. And then Austin Flowers will be with me Saturday, where we'll talk Blackfire Rebellions. And then he's also going to come back with me, and we're going to do the Aegon 3 character study. I got a lot of ideas about Aegon 3, about his possible later reign, where Fire and Blood ends, what might be picked up with Blood and Fire, how this man kept this realm together despite his obvious PTSD and depression and having no dragons, but still kept a relative peace until his son decided to stick his dick in the Dornish hornet nest. So yeah, I still got a lot in me to talk about. And we'll also, I'm sure in the future, we'll be doing more Lovecraft stuff, more Bierce, more short stories. I wanted to do I'm also wanted to do something with Mephistopheles and the devil's bargains and stuff like that. Like I got ideas. I'm probably not going to be a solely Song of Ice and Fire is going to be a mainstay of the channel, but it's probably not going to be the only thing I talk about. Just in the way that like even other Song of Ice and Fire channels kind of branch out. Like Gray Area also does with and I Eat Zebra. They got covering Euphoria and American Horror Story, and yeah. So I'm going to be more, but definitely a lot of sci-fi and horror is, as well as fantasy, is where the Grey Waste Tim channel is gonna go on. But I hope you enjoyed this stream. I hope you join us again Saturday when Austin's on for Blackfire Rebellions. I'll try and have Damon more on camera. I mean, I'm sure he probably will be, since we'll probably be saying Damon a lot. And yeah, and the Aegon 3 stream, and then I got we'll do what's going down at the Five Forts, and we'll probably doing that as a comparison. Another foil thing, comparing the current situation in ET of the three emperors with the War of the Five Kings, and looking at the Five Forts as being analogous to the Wall and what the situation might be out there. That's all coming in the future. So I thank you. I hope you enjoyed the stream. Hope you got a better idea of at least what I think George is doing just with the world building, or you just got a new perspective on something that we really know nothing about, but really how you can make so much out of so little, how such great world building can allow for that. So yeah, if you like this, like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you next time. Good night.